The wind screamed through the mountains like a woman in mourning, and Fletcher Owens knew he should have ridden down from his claim 3 days ago before the November storm settled in to stay. He stood on the porch of his rough-hewn cabin, watching snow pile up against the split rail fence he had built the previous summer, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. The year was 1876, and winter in the Sierra Nevada mountains above Jamestown, California, came early and stayed late. Fletcher had been working his mining claim for 5 years now, alone except for his mule and the occasional visit from trappers passing through. He liked it that way. At 29, he had seen enough of humanity during his time in the war to prefer the company of pine trees and granite peaks. He was about to head back inside when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it beneath the howl of wind through the pines. A whimper, a human sound. Fletcher froze, his hand instinctively moving to the knife at his belt. Out here, you learn to be cautious. But the sound came again, weaker this time, and it was coming from underneath his porch. Fletcher descended the steps carefully, his boots crunching in the fresh powder. He crouched down and peered into the darkness beneath the weathered planks. At first, he saw nothing but shadows and the stone foundation he had laid himself. Then something moved. A figure, small and huddled, pressed against the cabin's base where the wind could not quite reach. "Who's there?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. Years of living alone did that to a man. The figure shifted, and in the dim light filtering through the porch slats, Fletcher saw a face. A woman's face, pale as death, her lips blue with cold. Her eyes met his, wide and terrified, and she tried to speak, but her jaw was trembling too violently. Fletcher did not hesitate. He reached in and pulled her out, surprised by how light she was, how fragile her body felt through the thin, soaked dress she wore. No coat, no shawl, nothing but a cotton dress that might have been blue once but was now gray with mud and melted snow. Her dark hair hung in wet ropes around her face, and when he lifted her, he realized she was barely conscious. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" he muttered, but he was already carrying her up the steps. The door banged open under his boot, and the warmth from the fire he had kept burning hit them both like a wall. The woman made a small sound, something between a sob and a gasp. Fletcher laid her on the bearskin rug in front of the hearth, the closest warm spot he could manage. Her whole body was shaking, convulsing with cold. He had seen this before, during the war. Exposure. If he did not get her warm soon, she would die. He moved fast, his hands steady despite the shock coursing through him. First, he grabbed every blanket he owned from the chest in the corner. Then, he knelt beside her and began working on the buttons of her dress. Her fingers were pressed against her chest, curled into frozen claws. She tried to push him away weakly. "I'm not going to hurt you," Fletcher said, gentler this time, "but these wet clothes will kill you. You need to understand that." Something in his voice must have reached her because she stopped fighting. Her eyes, he noticed now, were brown, the color of creek water running over stones. She watched him as he peeled the sodden fabric away from her skin, revealing a thin chemise underneath that was just as wet. Fletcher tried to maintain what dignity he could for her, wrapping her immediately in the dry blankets, but he could see she was past caring about modesty. She was past caring about anything except the desperate need to stop shaking. He layered the blankets around her, tucking them tight. Then he went to the stove where he always kept a pot of water warming and poured some into a tin cup. He added a generous splash of whiskey from the bottle on the shelf. "Can you drink?" He crouched beside her, slipping one arm behind her shoulders to prop her up. She was still trembling violently, but she managed to part her lips. Fletcher held the cup carefully, letting the liquid trickle into her mouth. She coughed, sputtered, but swallowed. He gave her more. "Slow," he said, "just slow." They stayed like that for what felt like hours. Fletcher fed her the warm whiskey-laced water, added more wood to the fire until the cabin was almost uncomfortably hot, and watched the color slowly return to her face. The violent shaking gradually subsided to occasional tremors. Her breathing evened out. Finally, she closed her eyes and slept, a real sleep rather than the half-conscious state she had been in before. Fletcher stood and looked down at her. Questions tumbled through his mind like stones in a rock slide. Who was she? How had she ended up under his porch in the middle of a blizzard? Where had she come from? The nearest settlement was Jamestown, a hard 5-mile ride down the mountain on a good day. In this weather it might as well have been 100 miles. He hung her wet dress by the fire, noting the tears in the fabric, not from wear, but from catching on branches, thorns. She had run through the forest. The realization settled heavy in his gut. People did not run through a mountain forest in November wearing nothing but a dress, unless they were running from something. Fletcher walked to the window and looked out at the storm. The snow was coming down so thick now he could barely see the pine tree 20 feet from his door. Nobody would be coming up this mountain tonight. Nobody could. Whatever she had run from, it could not reach her here. Not in this weather. They were snowed in together for better or worse. He looked back at the sleeping woman. She was young. He could see that now. Early 20s, maybe. Bruises shadowed her arms, and when he had removed her dress, he had noticed more on her ribs. Somebody had hurt her. Somebody had hurt her bad enough that she had fled into the wilderness in winter without so much as a coat. Fletcher felt anger kindle in his chest, hot and familiar. He had thought he left that feeling behind when he came to these mountains, but apparently it had just been sleeping. He moved to his rifle, checked that it was loaded, and set it by the door within easy reach. Then he pulled his chair closer to the fire and the sleeping woman and settled in to keep watch through the night. The storm raged outside. Inside, the fire crackled. And Fletcher Owens, who had chosen solitude and silence, found himself responsible for another human life. When she woke, dawn was breaking gray and cold beyond the windows. The storm had not let up. Fletcher was at the stove, frying salt pork and cornmeal mush in his cast-iron skillet. He heard her stir and turned. She was sitting up, the blankets wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes taking in the cabin with quick darting movements, looking for exits, looking for weapons. Fletcher recognized the behavior. He had worn that same expression once, long ago. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "I give you my word on that." Her eyes snapped to his face. She studied him for a long moment. Fletcher knew what she saw. A big man, 6'3", broad through the shoulders and chest from years of hard labor, long dark hair that brushed his collar, a full beard, arms thick with muscle. He looked like what he was, a man who lived alone in the mountains and made his living breaking rock and hauling ore. But he kept his posture open, non-threatening, giving her space to breathe. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "My cabin, about 5 miles up the mountain from Jamestown. I'm Fletcher Owens." She pulled the blankets tighter. "How did I get here?" "I found you under my porch last night, near frozen to death." He turned back to the stove, giving her a moment to process. "You have been asleep about 7 hours, storm's still going strong." Silence. Then, "Thank you." Fletcher nodded. He dished the food onto 2 tin plates and brought one to her. "You need to eat. Get your strength back." She took the plate with shaking hands, not from cold this time, but from hunger and weakness. She ate like someone who had not seen food in days, shoveling the simple fare into her mouth without pause. Fletcher sat in his chair and ate his own breakfast, watching her from the corner of his eye. When she finished, she set the plate aside and looked at him directly for the first time. "My name is Nora, Nora Ashford. Pleased to meet you, Miss Ashford, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Something that might have been a laugh escaped her. "Yes, well," she looked down at her hands. "I suppose you are wondering what I was doing under your porch. I am wondering, but you do not owe me an explanation, not unless you want to give one." Nora was quiet for a long time. The fire popped and hissed. Outside, the wind continued its ceaseless howl. Finally she spoke. "I was married 4 months ago." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "To a man named Samuel Grant. He owns a dry goods store in Jamestown. Everyone said I was lucky. Said he was a good match for an orphan girl with no family and no prospects." Fletcher said nothing, just listened. He was kind before the wedding, gentle, said all the right things. Nora's hands clenched in the blanket. But after he changed, or maybe he just stopped pretending. I do not know. He would get angry over nothing, a meal cooked wrong, a word spoken out of turn. At first it was just yelling, then it was... She trailed off, but Fletcher had seen the bruises. He did not need her to finish. 3 days ago he beat me worse than ever before. Said he was going to teach me a proper lesson. I thought he might kill me. So that night, after he passed out drunk, I ran. Just ran. I did not have a plan, did not grab supplies or warm clothes. I just knew I had to get away. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I walked all night. I did not know where I was going. I just kept moving uphill into the trees. Then the storm hit. I kept walking anyway. I do not know how I found your cabin. I just remember seeing the light from your window, and then I was crawling under your porch, and then you were there. Fletcher felt that hot anger again, burning in his chest. Does he know where you went? No, I do not think so. Like I said, I just ran. No direction, no plan. Good. Fletcher stood and walked to the window. The world beyond was white, impenetrable. This storm will cover your tracks. No one can follow you in this weather. And when it clears, he turned back to her, we will figure something out. But for now, you are safe. I promise you that. Nora looked at him, really looked at him. Why are you helping me? You do not know me. Fletcher considered the question. I spent 3 years fighting in the war, saw things no man should see, did things I am not proud of. When I came back, I could not stomach being around people anymore, so I came here, built this cabin, worked my claim, keep to myself. He met her eyes. But I'm not so far gone that I would turn away a woman in need. My mother raised me better than that. Something in Nora's expression softened. Is your mother still alive? No, died of fever when I was 16. My father went 2 years later. Broken heart, the doctor said, but I think he just did not see the point in going on without her. Fletcher moved back to his chair. They loved each other fierce, the kind of love you read about in books. I always wanted that for myself, but he shrugged. War changes a man, makes him hard, not fit for decent company. You do not seem hard to me, Nora said softly. You seem kind. Fletcher did not know how to respond to that, so he stood and gathered their plates. You should rest more. Your body has been through a trauma. Sleep will help. Nora nodded, already looking drowsy again. The warmth of the cabin, the food in her belly, the safety. It was all conspiring to pull her back under. Fletcher brought her more blankets, built up the fire, and watched as she drifted off. He spent the day doing small chores around the cabin, mending harness leather, sharpening his knives, checking his supplies. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and he calculated they had enough food for a week, maybe 10 days if they were careful. Longer if he could get out to his cache in the lean-to, but in this weather, even that 20-foot journey was dangerous. Nora slept through most of the day, waking only once to use the chamber pot behind the privacy screen Fletcher had rigged up in the corner. She ate more cornmeal mush and drank water, then slept again. He was not worried. Sleep was the body's way of healing. By evening, the storm had intensified. Wind rattled the shutters and shrieked down the chimney. Fletcher added more wood to the fire and settled into his chair with his pipe and tobacco. He watched the sleeping woman and wondered what the hell he was going to do. She could not go back to Jamestown. That much was clear. Even if her husband did not kill her outright, she would be trapped in that marriage with no escape. Divorce was nearly impossible to obtain and carried such a stigma that Nora would be ruined. She could try to claim abandonment or cruelty, but the courts rarely sided with women, especially against respected businessmen. She could go somewhere else, San Francisco maybe, or Sacramento. Start over with a new name, find work. But winter was here, and traveling was dangerous. And Fletcher had seen what happened to women alone in mining camps and frontier towns. Without protection, without means, they ended up in situations worse than the one Nora had just escaped. He could take her himself, see her safely to wherever she wanted to go. Once the storm broke and the passes cleared, it would mean leaving his claim unattended, risking claim jumpers, but he could manage a trip down to the city if needed. Or, the thought crept in, unbidden, unwelcome. She could stay here, through the winter at least. He had supplies. The cabin was small but adequate for 2 people if they respected each other's space. Come spring, when travel was easier, they could reassess. It was not proper, of course. An unmarried man and woman living together would scandalize any decent folks who heard about it. But there were no decent folks up here. Just Fletcher, Nora, and the mountains. He pushed the thought away. He was getting ahead of himself. First, they had to survive the storm. Then, they could worry about the future. Night fell, and the temperature dropped further. Fletcher banked the fire and spread his bedroll on the floor on the opposite side of the room from Nora. He wanted her to feel safe, to understand he had no intentions toward her. He lay awake long into the night, listening to the storm and the soft sound of her breathing, and wondered what the hell he had gotten himself into. The storm blew itself out 3 days later. Fletcher woke on the morning of the 4th day to silence. Real silence, not just a lull in the wind. He got up and opened the door to a transformed world. Snow had piled up higher than his waist in the drifts, sculpted into fantastic shapes by the wind. The sky was brilliant blue, and the sun sparkled off the white expanse with painful intensity. Behind him, he heard Nora stirring. She had grown stronger over the past few days, taking over some of the cooking and helping with small tasks around the cabin. They had talked more, getting to know each other in the careful way of strangers thrust together by circumstance. Fletcher had learned she could read and write, unusual for a woman of her station. Her father had been a schoolteacher before he died, and he had educated her himself. She loved books, missed them desperately. Fletcher had 3 books in his cabin: a Bible, a copy of Shakespeare's collected works, and a book of Robert Burns' poetry his mother had treasured. He had given them all to Nora, and she had fallen on them like a starving woman on bread. "The storm stopped," Nora said, coming to stand beside him at the door. She had been wearing one of Fletcher's shirts and a pair of his trousers, cinched tight with rope and rolled up at the ankles. Her dress was dry now, but torn beyond easy repair, and she seemed reluctant to put it back on anyway. Fletcher thought she looked better in men's clothing, more comfortable, less constrained. "Yes, but the snow's too deep to travel yet. Give it a few days to settle and compact." Nora nodded. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Fletcher, I need to talk to you about something." He turned to look at her. Her face was serious, worried. "I cannot go back to Jamestown, ever. You know that, do not you?" "Yes. And I cannot stay here forever. It would not be proper. People would talk. There are no people up here to talk. But there will be. Eventually. When you go to town for supplies, when trappers or prospectors pass through, word would get out." She twisted her hands together. "You have been so kind to me. I do not want to repay that kindness by ruining your reputation." Fletcher almost laughed at that. "Nora, I do not have a reputation to ruin. I am a hermit who lives on a mountain. Folks in town already think I am half wild. Still," she looked up at him, "I need a plan. I need to know what I am going to do." Fletcher had been thinking about this constantly for the past 3 days. He took a breath. "I have an idea, but I do not know how you will feel about it. Tell me. You could stay, through the winter, help me with the cabin work, the cooking, things like that. I would teach you to shoot, to trap, to handle yourself in the wilderness. Come spring, when the pass is clear, I would take you wherever you want to go, San Francisco, Sacramento, anywhere. I would give you enough money to get started fresh, find a job, a place to live, a new life." He paused. "It is not perfect, and it means living here with me for months, but it would be safe. You would be safe." Nora stared at him. "You would do that? Give up your solitude for months just to help me?" "Yes." "Why?" Fletcher looked out at the snow-covered mountains. The pine trees bent under their white burden. "Because I can, and because no one should have to live in fear, especially not in their own home, especially not from someone who swore to protect them." Nora was quiet for so long that Fletcher thought she was going to refuse. Then she said, "I accept. Thank you, Fletcher. Thank you more than I can say." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Something had shifted in his chest, some long, frozen part of himself cracking open. He had been alone for so long, and now he was not. It terrified him and thrilled him in equal measure. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Fletcher would wake early and tend to the livestock, his mule, a stubborn beast named Samson, and the 3 chickens he kept for eggs. Then he would check his traps, haul water from the stream when it was not frozen over, split wood. Nora took over the cooking, and Fletcher was surprised to discover she had a talent for making even his simple provisions taste good. She could make salt pork and beans into something approaching a feast. She mended his clothes, darned his socks, organized his supplies with an efficiency he had never managed. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire. Sometimes Fletcher would read aloud from one of his books, his deep voice filling the cabin with Shakespeare's words or Burns's poetry. Sometimes they just talked. Nora told him about her childhood, about her father who had been killed in a mining accident, her mother who had died bringing her into the world, about growing up in a series of boarding houses and charitable institutions, always the orphan, always the outsider, about how Samuel Grant had seemed like salvation, a way out, a chance at a normal life. Fletcher told her about the war, not much, but more than he had told anyone in years, about the friends he had lost, the things he had seen, about coming home to find his father dead and the farm sold for debts, about deciding there was nothing left for him in civilization, so he had come west to find something else. Gold, maybe. Peace, definitely. "Did you find it?" Nora asked one night. "Peace?" Fletcher considered. "I found quiet. I thought that was the same thing. Now I am not so sure." Nora smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her face. Fletcher felt his heart stutter in his chest. He looked away, unsettled. As the weeks passed, Fletcher started teaching Nora wilderness skills as he had promised. He taught her to shoot, first with his old Navy revolver, then with his rifle. She was a natural, her hands steady and her eye keen. He taught her to read tracks in the snow, to identify different animals by their prints and droppings. He taught her to set snares and traps, to skin and dress game, to tan hides. Nora absorbed it all with fierce concentration, as if she were studying for the most important examination of her life. "Why are you working so hard at this?" Fletcher asked one afternoon after she had successfully trapped and skinned 2 rabbits without his help. Nora looked up from her work, her hands bloody but her expression satisfied. "Because I am never going to be helpless again, never going to be dependent on someone else for my survival. If I can do this, if I can live out here and take care of myself, then I will never have to stay somewhere I do not want to be. Never have to tolerate being hurt because I have no other choice." Fletcher understood that. He respected it. But part of him was sad too, because her determination spoke to depths of pain and fear he wished she had never experienced. Christmas came and went with little fanfare. Fletcher had never been one for celebrations, but Nora insisted they mark the day somehow. She made a special meal with the last of the dried apples Fletcher had stored away, baking them into something approaching a pie. They ate by candlelight, and Nora sang carols in a clear, sweet voice that made Fletcher's chest ache. "I wish I had something to give you," he said when she finished singing. "A proper Christmas gift." Nora shook her head. "You gave me my life back, Fletcher. That is gift enough." But he could see she was touched by the thought. The next day, while she was out checking the traps, Fletcher took a piece of soft deerskin he had been saving and began to work. His hands, more accustomed to rough labor than fine craftsmanship, moved slowly and carefully. He cut and shaped and sewed, working by firelight long after Nora had gone to sleep. When he finished, he had made her a pair of gloves. They were not fancy, but they were well made and would keep her hands warm. He left them by her bedroll, anonymous. The next morning, Nora found them. She held them up, her eyes wide. "Fletcher, did you make these?" He shrugged, embarrassed. "Your hands were getting chapped. Figured you needed them." Nora pulled the gloves on. They fit perfectly. She looked at him, and there were tears in her eyes. "No one has ever made me anything before, not once in my whole life." Fletcher felt something crack open further in his chest. "Well, now someone has." Nora crossed the cabin and did something that shocked him. She hugged him, just wrapped her arms around his waist and pressed her face against his chest and held on. Fletcher stood frozen for a moment, unsure what to do. Then, slowly, he put his arms around her shoulders and hugged her back. She fit perfectly against him, he realized. The top of her head came just to his chin. She was small and delicate compared to his bulk, but she was strong too. He could feel the muscle in her back and arms from weeks of hard work. She smelled like wood smoke and pine and something indefinably her. Thank you," she whispered. "You are welcome," he managed. She pulled back, wiping her eyes and laughing a little. "I'm sorry. I did not mean to be emotional." "It is all right." Fletcher's voice came out rougher than usual. "I do not mind." Something had changed between them in that moment. Fletcher felt it, and he could see from Nora's expression that she felt it too. A shift, subtle but profound. They were not just two strangers sheltering together anymore. They were something else, something more. January arrived with more snow and biting cold. Fletcher's cabin, which had always felt spacious for one person, now felt intimate with two. He was constantly aware of Nora's presence, the sound of her moving around the cabin, the sight of her reading by the fire, her face peaceful in the flickering light, the way she hummed while she cooked, the way she laughed at his dry observations about life and people and the absurdity of the world. He was falling in love with her. The realization hit him one morning while he was watching her feed the chickens. She was talking to them, giving each one a name and a personality, scolding them gently when they pecked at her feet. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her eyes bright, and she looked so alive, so vital, that Fletcher felt his breath catch. He loved her. He loved her strength and her determination. He loved her kindness and her humor. He loved the way she had refused to let life break her, even when it tried its damnedest. He loved her scars and her fears and her courage. He loved everything about her, and it terrified him, because in the spring she was going to leave. That was the plan. He would take her to the city, give her money to start over, and then he would come back here. Alone, just like he had been before. And the thought of that, of returning to his solitary existence after months of having Nora in his life, made him feel empty in a way he had never experienced before. He tried to hide it, tried to maintain the friendly, respectful distance he had established. But Fletcher had never been good at hiding his feelings, and Nora was perceptive. "You have been quiet lately," she said one evening. They were sitting by the fire after dinner, as had become their custom. "Is something wrong?" "No, just thinking." "About what?" Fletcher stared into the flames. "About spring, about you leaving, about going back to being alone." Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What if I did not want to leave?" His head snapped up. "What? What if I wanted to stay?" She was looking at him steadily, her brown eyes serious. "Here, with you." Fletcher's heart was pounding. "Nora, you do not know what you are saying. Living here is hard, especially for a woman. No society, no neighbors, just work and isolation and long winters." "I know all that. I have been living it for months now. That is different. That was temporary. A necessity. But choosing to stay here permanently, that is something else entirely." "I know." Nora leaned forward. "Fletcher, I have been thinking about this a lot. Before I met you, I thought I knew what I wanted from life. A house in town, a respectable husband, a normal life. But I was wrong. That life almost killed me. Out here, I am free. I can breathe. I can be myself without fear. I have never felt safer or more content than I have these past months with you. But you cannot just stay here. People would talk. They would call you names, say you were living in sin." "I do not care what people say. I stopped caring about that the night I ran into the snow to escape my husband." She paused. "Unless you do not want me to stay. If that is the case, just say so. I will not be offended." "Not want you to stay?" Fletcher gave a short laugh. "Nora, I want you to stay more than I have ever wanted anything in my life. But I want you to stay for the right reasons. Because you want to be here. Not because you feel you have no other choice." "Then give me another choice," Nora said. "Marry me." Fletcher stared at her, certain he had misheard. "What?" "Marry me." Nora's voice was steady, her gaze unwavering. "If we are married, it does not matter what people say. It would be proper, respectable, and I would be free of Samuel legally. A wife can leave her husband if she has grounds, and I have plenty. But I would need to be married to someone else first, to prove I was not just running away but had a legitimate new life." Fletcher's mind was reeling. "Nora, you barely know me, and after what you went through with your first husband, why would you want to put yourself in that position again?" "Because you are nothing like Samuel." Nora moved closer to him, close enough that he could feel the heat of her body. "You are kind and patient and good. You have protected me and taught me and never once tried to control me or hurt me. I trust you, Fletcher, more than I have ever trusted anyone, and She hesitated, then pushed forward. "I love you. I think I have loved you since the night you found me and brought me inside and made me feel safe for the first time in months." Fletcher could not breathe, could not think. "You love me?" "Yes." Nora reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small and delicate in his rough, calloused palm. "I know it is fast. I know it is strange. But out here, time moves differently. These past months have felt like a lifetime, and I know in my heart that I want to spend my life with you, if you will have me." Fletcher looked down at their joined hands. Then he looked up at her face, at those brown eyes watching him with hope and fear and love. He thought about his empty years, about the loneliness he had convinced himself he preferred, about the peace he had been seeking and never quite found. And he realized that peace was not the absence of other people. It was the presence of the right person. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have been trying not to, trying to be practical and sensible. But I love you, Nora. More than I thought I could love anyone." Nora smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Then marry me. Make me your wife. Let me stay here with you. Let us build a life together." Fletcher pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her, and buried his face in her hair. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, God, yes." They held each other for a long time, the fire crackling beside them, the wind whistling softly outside. When they finally pulled apart, Fletcher cupped Nora's face in his hands and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape and taste of each other. Then it deepened, became more urgent, more real. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Fletcher rested his forehead against Nora's. "I will be good to you. I swear it. I will protect you and provide for you and never raise a hand to you in anger. This I promise." "I know," Nora whispered. "I know." The next challenge was figuring out how to actually get married. The nearest preacher was in Jamestown, and Nora obviously could not go there. The next nearest was probably in Sonora, 20 miles to the southeast. But winter travel was still dangerous, and Fletcher was reluctant to take Nora anywhere she might be recognized. "There is an old trapper named Josiah who passes through sometimes," Fletcher said. "He used to be a circuit preacher before he retired and took up trapping. He's not ordained anymore, technically, but folks out here do not much care about technicalities. If we could find him, he would marry us." "When does he usually come through?" "Late winter, early spring. He runs a trap line in the high country." So they waited. February came, bringing occasional breaks in the weather. Fletcher took Nora out on snowshoes, teaching her to navigate the winter landscape. They checked his traps together, hauled firewood, and worked side by side to maintain the cabin and livestock. And every night they slept on opposite sides of the cabin, waiting for the day they could make their union official. It was hard, that waiting. They loved each other, wanted each other, but both were determined to do things properly. Fletcher because he wanted to give Nora the respect and honor she deserved after being treated so poorly. Nora because she wanted their life together to start on solid ground, without any shadows or doubts. In early March, Josiah finally appeared. Fletcher heard the dogs first, the high yipping of the half-wolf team the old trapper used to pull his sled. He stepped outside to see Josiah emerging from the tree line, his long white beard crusted with ice, his face weathered to the color of old leather. "Fletcher Owens," Josiah called out. "Still alive, I see. Thought maybe the winter got you this year." "Not yet, old man. Get yourself in here. I have coffee on." Josiah secured his dogs and trudged to the cabin. When he stepped inside and saw Nora, he stopped dead. His bushy eyebrows shot up. "Well now, this is a surprise." Fletcher made introductions and explained the situation, leaving out the details of Nora's first marriage, but making it clear she needed protection and a fresh start. Josiah listened carefully, his sharp eyes moving between Fletcher and Nora. "So you want me to marry you too?" he said finally. "Yes, sir," Fletcher said, "if you are willing." Josiah was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he nodded. "I am willing. You are a good man, Fletcher. I have known you 5 years now, and you have always dealt straight with me. If you say this girl needs your protection and you want to give it, I believe you." He turned to Nora. "And you, miss, are you entering this marriage of your own free will? No coercion or pressure?" "None," Nora said firmly. "This is my choice, completely." "All right then." Josiah pulled out his pipe. "Let me have that coffee, and then we will get you two hitched." The ceremony was simple but meaningful. They stood in front of the fireplace, Josiah facing them with his Bible open. Nora wore her mended dress, and Fletcher had shaved his beard and combed his hair. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and cherish each other through all the trials life might bring. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Josiah said. "Fletcher, you may kiss your bride." Fletcher pulled Nora close and kissed her deeply while Josiah chuckled and clapped his hands. When they broke apart, both were smiling. "Congratulations," Josiah said. "May you have many happy years together." He stayed for dinner, regaling them with stories of his winter trapping adventures. Then he headed out, refusing Fletcher's offer to spend the night. "My dogs are restless, and I've got miles to cover yet," he said. Before he left, he pulled Fletcher aside. "You take good care of that girl," he said quietly. "She's been hurt bad. I can see it in her eyes. She needs gentleness." "I know," Fletcher said. "I will, I promise." Josiah nodded and disappeared into the trees. That night, for the first time, Fletcher and Nora shared a bed. They came together with tenderness and wonder, learning each other slowly, carefully. Fletcher was patient, letting Nora set the pace, showing her that intimacy could be gentle and loving instead of painful and frightening. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Nora's head on Fletcher's chest, his arms wrapped around her. "I never knew it could be like that," Nora whispered. "So different from—" "Shh." Fletcher kissed the top of her head. "That is in the past. This is our life now. Ours." Nora snuggled closer. "I love you, Fletcher Owens." "I love you too, Nora Owens." Nora Owens. She tested the name in her mind and smiled. It fit. It felt right. For the first time in her life, she felt like she truly belonged somewhere, not just somewhere, to someone. And he belonged to her too. Spring came slowly to the mountains, the snow melting in fits and starts, revealing the brown earth beneath. Streams swelled with runoff, birds returned from their southern migrations, and the world turned green again. Fletcher worked his claim more seriously now, wanting to build up funds for his growing family. He had plans. He wanted to expand the cabin, add a proper bedroom, and maybe a second room for children when they came. He wanted to buy more livestock, maybe a horse for Nora. He wanted to give her a good life, the life she deserved. Nora proved to be an invaluable partner. She managed the household with efficiency, freeing Fletcher to focus on mining. She planted a garden, coaxing vegetables from the Rocky Mountain soil. She learned to preserve food, to make soap and candles, to do all the tasks necessary for frontier living. But she also continued to develop her wilderness skills, going out with Fletcher to hunt and trap. They were true partners in every sense of the word. In May, a merchant passing through brought news from Jamestown. Samuel Grant had left town, the merchant said, packed up his store, and moved on. Rumor was he'd gotten into debt gambling and skipped out before his creditors could collect. No one knew where he had gone, and frankly, no one much cared. He had not been well liked. Nora received this news with mixed feelings, relief that he was gone and unlikely to come looking for her, but also anger that he had gotten away without facing any consequences for his cruelty. "Maybe he will face consequences somewhere else," Fletcher said, holding her close. "Men like that usually do eventually. Karma has a way of catching up." "I hope so," Nora said. "I hope he gets everything he deserves." But mostly, she tried not to think about Samuel at all. He was part of her past, and she was focused on her future now. In July, Nora realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when she finally told Fletcher, he looked stunned. "A baby," he said. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes." Nora was nervous. She was not sure how he would react. Children meant more responsibility, more mouths to feed, and her own childhood had been so difficult that she worried about being a mother. But Fletcher broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing. "We are having a baby! Nora, this is wonderful!" His joy was infectious. Nora found herself laughing too, her worries melting away. With Fletcher by her side, she could do this. They could do this together. Fletcher became even more protective as Nora's pregnancy progressed. He insisted she not overwork herself, taking on tasks she had previously handled. Nora found it equal parts touching and frustrating. She was pregnant, not fragile, and she told him so. "I know," Fletcher said, "but humor me. I want to take care of you." "You already take care of me. You always have." "Then let me take care of you more." Nora rolled her eyes but secretly loved his attentiveness. It was such a stark contrast to her first marriage, where her needs had been ignored or dismissed. Fletcher anticipated what she needed before she even asked. He rubbed her feet when they swelled. He made sure she ate regularly. He built her a rocking chair so she would have a comfortable place to sit. He was going to be an amazing father. The winter came again, and Nora spent much of it in the cabin as her belly grew large. Fletcher worked less, staying close in case she needed him. He read to her for hours, his deep voice soothing. They talked about names for the baby, about their hopes and dreams for their child's future. "I want our children to be strong," Nora said, "independent. I want them to know they can rely on themselves." "They will be," Fletcher said. "With you as their mother, how could they be anything else?" In early February, almost exactly a year after Fletcher had found Nora under his porch, their son was born. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Fletcher was terrified he was going to lose her. But Nora was strong, stronger than either of them had known. She pushed through the pain and exhaustion, and when the baby finally came, his lusty cry filling the cabin, she laughed through her tears. "It is a boy," Fletcher said, his voice choked with emotion. He cleaned the baby gently and wrapped him in soft cloth before placing him in Nora's arms. A perfect, healthy boy. Nora looked down at their son, at his tiny red face and shock of dark hair, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." They named him Thomas after Fletcher's father, Thomas Owens, Tommy for short. He was a good baby, healthy and alert with his father's strong lungs and his mother's sharp eyes. Fletcher proved to be exactly the father Nora had known he would be, patient and gentle, but firm when needed. He fashioned toys for Tommy from wood and leather. He sang to him, old songs from Fletcher's own childhood. He changed diapers and walked the floor with the baby when he was fussy, never once complaining. "You are a natural at this," Nora said one night, watching Fletcher rock their sleeping son. "I am terrified every second," Fletcher admitted, "scared I am going to do something wrong, break him somehow." "You will not. You are the best father Tommy could ask for." As Tommy grew, the cabin rang with new sounds: baby laughter, the pattering of small feet once he learned to walk, childish babble that gradually turned into words. He was a happy child, curious and bold, equally comfortable trailing after his father to check traps as he was helping his mother in the garden. 2 years after Tommy's birth, Nora had their second child. A daughter this time, with Nora's brown eyes and Fletcher's dark hair. They named her Rose, and she was as different from her brother as night from day. Where Tommy was boisterous and adventurous, Rose was contemplative and gentle. She loved flowers and birds and quiet moments by the fire. Fletcher expanded the cabin as he had planned, adding 2 more rooms, one for the children, one for storage and work. He improved the outbuildings, added a proper barn for the growing number of livestock. The claim was paying well, yielding enough gold to give them a comfortable life without being rich. They made occasional trips to Sonora for supplies, going as a family. People stared sometimes at the big mountain man with his pretty wife and beautiful children, but no one bothered them. Fletcher had a reputation as a man you did not cross, and folks respected that. Years passed. Tommy grew tall and strong like his father, learning to work the claim and hunt and trap. Rose learned to read and write from her mother, devouring every book they could get their hands on. She talked about becoming a teacher someday, following in her grandfather's footsteps. Nora and Fletcher added one more child to their family, another boy they named James. He was the baby, spoiled by his older siblings and doted on by his parents. He had his mother's stubborn streak and his father's strength, a combination that kept everyone on their toes. Through it all, Fletcher and Nora's love only deepened. They had their disagreements, of course. No marriage was perfect. But they had learned to communicate, to work through problems together. The respect and trust they had built in those early months in the cabin had become the foundation of a strong, lasting partnership. On their 10th anniversary, Fletcher took Nora on a ride up to a high meadow he had discovered years ago. It was summer, and wildflowers carpeted the ground in every color imaginable. They sat together on a blanket, watching the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Do you ever regret it?" Fletcher asked. "Choosing this life? Staying here with me instead of going to the city?" Nora looked at him, surprised. "Never. Not once. This is where I belong. With you, with our children. This is my home." Fletcher pulled her close. I think about that night sometimes, when I found you under my porch, half frozen, terrified, running from a nightmare, and I think about how close I came to not checking, to just going to bed and assuming the sound was an animal. But you did check. You saved me. No. Fletcher shook his head. We saved each other. I was so alone, Nora, so lost. I thought I wanted solitude, but what I really wanted was peace, and I found it with you. You gave me a reason to live again instead of just existing. Nora reached up and touched his bearded face. I love you, Fletcher Owens. More today than I did yesterday, more yesterday than the day before. Every day, I love you more. And I love you, until my last breath and beyond. They kissed as the sun sank below the mountains, the sky turning from gold to purple to black. Stars began to appear, one by one, until the heavens were filled with light. Below, in their cabin, their children were safe and warm, waiting for their parents to return. It was a good life, a simple life, but it was theirs, built on love and trust and the courage to keep going, even when the world seemed impossibly dark. Nora had run into a blizzard with nothing but the clothes on her back in the desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, she would find safety. And Fletcher, the mountain man who had thought he wanted to be alone, had found her shivering under his porch and brought her inside. He had given her warmth and shelter, and eventually, his heart. They had both been broken in their own ways, and they had healed each other. The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of mountain life. Tommy, at 18, had grown into a man as formidable as his father. He stood 6'1" with broad shoulders and strong arms from years of hard work. He had taken over much of the mining operation, freeing Fletcher to focus on other aspects of their homestead. Tommy was courting a girl from Sonora, a blacksmith's daughter named Elizabeth, and Fletcher suspected a wedding would be coming soon. Rose, at 16, had indeed pursued her dream of teaching. She spent several months each year in Sonora, working as an assistant to the school teacher there. The rest of the year she lived at home, teaching her younger brother and any children from neighboring claims who wanted to learn. She had her mother's gentle strength and her father's determination. James, now 10, was the wild card of the family. He loved the mountains even more than his father did, disappearing for hours to explore caves and climb trees and study the animals. Fletcher often joked that James was half mountain lion, the way he could scramble up rocky slopes and navigate the forest in near darkness. Fletcher himself was 49 now, his dark hair shot through with silver, his body still strong but showing the effects of decades of hard labor. His hands were gnarled from work, his face lined from sun and wind, but his eyes were still sharp, and his love for Nora burned as bright as ever. Nora was 42, her dark hair also touched with gray, her body softened by 3 pregnancies and years of frontier living. But she was still beautiful to Fletcher. More beautiful, in fact, because every line on her face told a story they had lived together. She moved with confidence now, all traces of the frightened, broken woman he had found under his porch long gone. One evening in late summer, the whole family gathered for dinner. Tommy had brought Elizabeth to meet them, and the meal was festive and loud with conversation and laughter. After dinner, while Nora and Rose cleaned up and the younger folks talked outside, Fletcher sat on the porch and smoked his pipe. Nora joined him eventually, settling into the chair beside his. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains they loved. Elizabeth seems like a good girl, Nora said eventually. She will make Tommy happy. Yes, and she's strong. She will need to be, living up here. She reminds me of myself at that age, determined, a little scared but hiding it well. Fletcher looked at his wife. You were never scared. Not really. You were the bravest person I ever met. Nora laughed softly. I was terrified, every day, for years. But I had you. That made all the difference. Fletcher reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. We made a good life, did we not? The best life, Nora agreed. Sometimes I think about that night, the storm, how close I came to dying out there in the snow, and I think about all the things that had to go exactly right for me to end up here. If Samuel had not been so cruel, I would never have run. If the storm had not driven me uphill instead of down, I would never have found your cabin. If you had not been the man you are, kind and decent, you might have turned me away. I could never have turned you away, but you could have. Many men would have. They would have seen a burden, a complication. But you saw someone who needed help, and you gave it without question. Nora squeezed his hand. You gave me everything, Fletcher. A home, a family, love, a life worth living. I will never be able to repay that. You repaid it 1,000 times over just by staying, by choosing me, by building this life with me. Fletcher's voice was rough with emotion. I was so alone, Nora, so empty. You filled all those empty spaces. You made me whole. They sat together as darkness fell, listening to the sounds of their children's laughter, the wind in the pines, the distant howl of a wolf. The mountains were eternal, unchanging in their grandeur. But lives were fragile and brief, and Fletcher was grateful for every moment he had been given with this woman. Inside the cabin, candles were lit, casting warm light through the windows. It was time to go in, to join the family, to continue the daily rituals of life. But Fletcher and Nora sat a moment longer, holding hands in the gathering dark, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their past lives. Eventually, they rose and went inside together, closing the door against the chill of the coming night. But the cold could not reach them now. They were home. They were together. And that was all that mattered. The seasons turned, as seasons always do. Tommy married Elizabeth in a ceremony held in the meadow where Fletcher and Nora had celebrated their anniversary years before. It was a beautiful wedding with folks coming from miles around to celebrate. Elizabeth moved into a new cabin Tommy had built near his parents' place, and before long, Fletcher and Nora became grandparents to a healthy baby girl named Sarah. Fletcher took to grandparenting with unexpected enthusiasm. He carved toys for Sarah, told her stories, carried her on his shoulders through the forest. Nora watched him with their granddaughter and fell in love with him all over again, seeing the gentle giant she had married reflected in his patient care for the child. Rose eventually married as well, to a young doctor who came to Sonora and fell instantly in love with the beautiful, educated woman who taught school. They settled in town, and Rose continued her teaching while helping her husband establish his practice. She visited the mountain cabin often, never losing her connection to her roots. James, true to his nature, became a guide and scout, leading prospectors and tourists through the wilderness he knew better than anyone. He built his own cabin even higher in the mountains than his father's, living alone but stopping by regularly to check on his aging parents. As Fletcher and Nora grew older, they gradually handed over more responsibilities to Tommy and his family. The mining claim was worked primarily by the younger generation now. The livestock were tended by others. Fletcher and Nora spent their days in quieter pursuits, reading, gardening, long walks through the forest when the weather allowed, and always, always they had each other. On a crisp autumn day, when Fletcher was 63 and Nora 56, they took one last ride up to their meadow. The wildflowers were gone now, replaced by golden grasses that swayed in the breeze. They spread a blanket and sat together, watching clouds drift across the brilliant blue sky. "I have been thinking," Fletcher said, "about what happens after." Nora looked at him. "After what?" "After we are gone. I want to be buried up here, in this meadow. It is the most beautiful place I have ever known. Well, second most beautiful." He smiled at her. "You are the first." Nora leaned her head on his shoulder. "I want to be buried here too, next to you, so we can stay together even then." "Always together," Fletcher agreed. They sat in silence for a while, then Nora spoke again. "I used to wonder what my life would have been like if I had never married Samuel. If I had just stayed in Jamestown, working whatever job I could find. Or if I had left town earlier, before he noticed me. I spent a lot of time on those what-ifs in the early days. And now? Now I do not wonder anymore. Because I understand that every choice, every hardship, every moment of pain led me to you. And I would go through it all again, 1,000 times over, if it meant ending up here. In this meadow. With you." Fletcher turned and kissed her forehead. "I love you, Nora Owens. I have loved you every day for 34 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left, and beyond that too, if there is anything beyond." "There is," Nora said with quiet certainty. There has to be, because what we have is too strong to end with death. Love like ours is forever. They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of amber and rose. Then they rode slowly back down to their cabin, to the family waiting there, to the life they had built together from nothing but hope and determination and love. Fletcher lived to be 71. He passed away in his sleep on a winter night, with Nora beside him in their bed, holding his hand. His heart simply stopped, worn out after decades of hard labor and hard living, but his face was peaceful, and Nora knew he had gone without fear. The family buried him in the meadow as he had wished, with a simple wooden marker carved by Tommy. Nora stood by the grave for a long time after everyone else had left, saying her goodbyes, promising to join him soon. She lived 3 more years without him. She stayed in the cabin they had shared, refusing to move to town with Rose or into Tommy's house. This was her home, her place. She tended Fletcher's grave regularly, planting wildflowers that bloomed each spring, keeping the area clear and peaceful. On a warm spring morning, Nora walked up to the meadow one last time. She sat beside Fletcher's grave, talking to him as if he were there, telling him about the family, about the new great-grandchildren, about all the small happenings of life. Then she laid down on the grass beside the grave, closed her eyes, and went to sleep. Tommy found her that evening when she did not come home. She was lying peacefully, a slight smile on her face, as if she had seen something wonderful before the end. They buried her next to Fletcher, under the sky he had loved and in the meadow where they had celebrated their love for so many years. The family placed a single marker for both of them, with a simple inscription: Fletcher and Nora Owens, together in life, together in eternity. And in the years that followed, their story became something of a legend in those mountains. The story of the mountain man who had found a woman shivering under his porch on a winter night and brought her inside, who had given her shelter and safety and, eventually, his heart, who had loved her with a fierce protective devotion that never wavered, and the story of the woman who had run from darkness into a blizzard and found light, who had been broken and became whole, who had learned that love did not have to hurt, that marriage could be partnership, that home was not a place but a person. Their descendants continued to live in those mountains, working the claim, raising families, living good lives. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, parents would tell their children the story of Fletcher and Nora, about courage and kindness, about second chances and new beginnings, about how love could heal the deepest wounds and build the strongest foundations. The meadow where they were buried remained a special place. Wildflowers continued to bloom there every spring, more abundant and beautiful than anywhere else in the mountains. People said it was because the ground was nourished by great love. Whether that was true or just a romantic notion, no one could say. But the flowers bloomed year after year, bright and beautiful and eternal. And on cold winter nights when the wind howled through the mountains, some folks claimed they could still see a light in the window of the old Owens cabin. A warm, welcoming light, like someone had left a lamp burning, like someone was home, waiting. It was probably just the reflection of moonlight on snow or the play of shadows through the trees. But people liked to think it was Fletcher and Nora, still keeping watch over the mountains they loved, still together in the home they had made. Because some love stories do not end. They just change form, becoming part of the landscape, woven into the very fabric of a place. Fletcher and Nora's love was like that. Strong as granite, enduring as the mountains themselves, shining like gold in the depths of the earth. It had survived hardship and fear. It had overcome loneliness and pain. And in the end, it had created something beautiful and lasting. A family, a legacy, a story worth telling. The cabin still stood, maintained by generations of Owens descendants. Inside, many of the original furnishings remained. The rocking chair Fletcher had made for Nora during her first pregnancy, the tin cups they had used for their wedding toast, the books Fletcher had read aloud by firelight, and on the mantel, carefully preserved, a pair of deerskin gloves, the ones Fletcher had made for Nora that first Christmas, when their love was new and uncertain but already taking root. Visitors to the cabin often remarked on the feeling of peace that permeated the place. It was not sad or haunted, despite the deaths that had occurred there. Instead, it felt welcoming, safe, like walking into a warm embrace, like coming home. And maybe that was the real magic of Fletcher and Nora's story. Not the dramatic rescue or the romantic setting or even the enduring love, though all those elements were present. The real magic was simpler. It was the demonstration that home was not about four walls and a roof. Home was about finding the one person who saw you, truly saw you in all your broken, frightened, imperfect glory, and chose to love you anyway. It was about being that person for someone else. It was about building something together, day by day, choice by choice, until you had created a life so rich and full that even death could not diminish it. Fletcher had been a mountain man, rough and solitary, convinced he wanted nothing to do with humanity. Nora had been a frightened woman running from violence, sure she could never trust anyone again. Separately, they had been incomplete. Together, they had been whole. And on that long-ago winter night, when Fletcher had heard a faint whimper beneath his porch and gone to investigate, when he had reached into the darkness and pulled out a half-frozen woman and carried her inside, he had set in motion a love story for the ages, not because it was grand or dramatic, though it had those moments, but because it was real, honest, built on mutual respect and genuine care, the kind of love that did not just weather storms but grew stronger because of them. In the end, that was their legacy. Not the gold Fletcher had mined or the land they had claimed, not even the family they had raised, though that was considerable. Their legacy was the proof that love could heal. That kindness mattered. That sometimes the bravest thing you could do was open your door to a stranger and offer them sanctuary. And that the greatest treasures were not found in the ground, but in the hearts of those who chose to face life's hardships together. Fletcher and Nora Owens, the mountain man and the woman he found shivering under his porch. Two broken souls who found each other in the wilderness and built a love that lasted beyond lifetimes. Their story was simple. Their story was extraordinary. And their story was complete. The mountains stood eternal and unchanging, watching over the meadow where they slept. The cabin they had built weathered storms and seasons, sheltering new generations. And somewhere, in the space between earth and sky, between memory and legend, Fletcher and Nora remained, together always, home at last, exactly where they belonged.